Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. We've reached the end of another series, Crisis of Faith. I hope you all enjoyed and learned something new, as did I. Let's reflect on the lessons learned and some key takeaway messages Dr. Shabir would like to leave us with. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So we're wrapping up our series on Crisis of Faith, and we had a lot of back and forth, I think, before we landed on the topic. So I just want to share the backstory of how we landed up on the different categories of our series.
Yeah, well, we looked at a study that was done by Yaqeen Institute, and the study is published on their website, yaqeen.org. And we saw that there were many categories of doubts or factors that lead people to doubt their faith in Islam. There were philosophical and scientific concerns. There were moral and social concerns, and also personal trauma. And under each one of these headings, there were several individual items, and we had a chance to discuss them at some length.
And I'll also mention, as a team, like there are some of our members who work with who do counseling or work with organizations that provide counseling like this, and they also shared with us some of the experiences or not cases, but like sort of category areas. So we also fed that into sort of our topics.
Yes.
Now, for me, it was a personal, not a personal story, but I've heard so many people struggling with it. So I thought, for me personally, I thought it was an exciting topic from that perspective because I thought people would relate to it. I know the team felt that way too. What was it about the topic that resonated with you?
Well, I get emails from young people especially, but Muslims more generally, every day. People who are writing to me, and they may express their reasons for doubt. I have Muslim families visiting me, so I can talk to one of the members because somebody's having doubts about the faith. And it could be any one of these things. It could be their scientific concerns, it could be philosophical, it could be social. So I see these doubts among Muslims, and I realize that we need to deal with this as a community. We cannot just leave that be. Al-Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, in his book, I just said something in Arabic, I should translate it, peace be upon him. May God have mercy on him. So he in his book, The Revival of the Religious Sciences in Islam, said that if somebody has a doubt about something, then it becomes obligatory for that person to find the knowledge that will remove that doubt. I said about something, meaning something in the faith. So normally we would only be required to have that much knowledge of the faith that is required for our practice of the faith. And of course to hold the correct opinion about God and His Prophet and so on. Correct belief and correct practice. But one does not have to become a scholar of the faith. One does not have to know everything about all aspects of Muslim belief and everything about all aspects of Muslim practice. To be even more specific, if charity is obligatory on somebody who has wealth, but if somebody doesn't have any wealth, then charity is not obligatory on that person. So the one on whom the charity is obligatory, that person needs to know the rules about dispensing his charity. But the one who does not have that obligation to dispense charity does not need to know how to dispense his charity. But if he comes upon wealth, then he needs to have that knowledge. Now, what about doubts? So we don't need to know everything about Islam, but then if we have a sort of doubt which becomes to that level of crisis of faith, then definitely we need to acquire that knowledge which will remove the doubt. Now, we as a community, and especially the Muslim leaders, have to rise to this occasion and realize that there are many young people out there who have doubts, and they're not comfortable coming forward with their doubts because they're worried. If they just mention their doubts, then maybe they will be viewed with suspicion. Maybe the imam or Muslim faith leader will think, okay, here's another lost one. And
I'll also add here, just to interrupt for a second, even like within your own family, a lot of kids have, or young people rather, even older I would say, have doubts, but they're not comfortable sharing because growing up you're taught, I guess this was back in the day, you're just taught, okay, there's nothing to be questioned about the faith. This is the faith and this is how it is. So how do you even sort of start to address that as well?
Well, I think we need to develop among our communities a culture of debating ideas. Debating ideas, just gives you clarity of thought. And people are afraid to start discussing ideas because they think if we start discussing this, then we will have to perhaps modify our traditional stance on things. But better modify the traditional stance after a thing is debated and properly understood than to hold on to misunderstandings, to myths, to legends, things that do not make sense, ends that do not really tie up together, and just pretend that everything is okay. It can be that people just hold to contrary views, two different contrary views at the same time, and they're just refusing to look at the details of this, being afraid that if they, maybe they already have a suspicion that if they look at this in some detail, then it will prove to be contrary, and you'll have to give up one and hold on to the other. They don't want to give up either one. They want to hold on to both contrary views, and so they're refusing to discuss the matter. So young people in particular who are experiencing doubt need to express their doubts, and there has to be a welcoming atmosphere in which the doubts can be expressed and also answered in a reasonable manner so that the doubts can be removed.
So what role do we as a collective community have, not just imams, but parents, educators, Islamic educators, I guess, in terms of fostering that?
Well, what can be done is that, just as many mosques hold public lectures, and of course lectures may be held not necessarily in the mosque, but in neutral grounds, such as university lecture halls, which can be rented, and a public lecture can be held there, conferences outside of the mosque environment. That will at least give you that sense that you're not in sacred ground here, so you're more in the arena of public discourse. And in that arena, especially when non-Muslims might be invited to some of these public gatherings, subject matter has to be discussed using reason, evidence, proof. Things have to be looked at from a perspective of a non-believer. How might a non-believer see this, and what do we need to say to persons who are not already believers in Islam? They might be believers in another faith. What might we say to them to help them to understand this topic? If we can get to that level, then we'll be explaining the faith in a way not only that is understandable to non-Muslims, but also understandable to our youth.
Do you think there are any gaps in our series that we did? I think we have about 12 segments on it, in terms of areas that we didn't address, or that we think, or that you think rather, maybe you need to pay more attention to, add to?
I don't recall that we said much about the problem of predestination. And this is something that I'm asked about again and again. Perhaps we'll do a whole series on this to just explain all of the nuances regarding this. It really requires a long discussion. But this is one of the areas that people doubt a lot. They are told on the one hand that God has predestined everything, and then they're told on the other hand that we have the freedom to choose our own path, and the two things seem contradictory one to another, because if God has already predestined our paths, then we can hardly choose it, or if we choose it, it's something that we have to choose, and if you have to choose it, you're not really choosing it, you're just simply conforming to something that was prescribed for you in advance. So this requires some explanation. I have a way of reconciling the two, but a lot of writing and a lot of speeches and Friday sermons and so on that are given them about the topic leave people more confused than the way they started out. And if somebody asks the question, they're given an answer which again is self-contradictory, but then the person is left confused, thinking that somewhere in there must have been a correct answer, but somehow it is above me. And some people just simply give up and say, okay, maybe there's something there that I don't quite understand, but it must be true, and I just live with it. And some people might take that as a turning point to leave the faith altogether, thinking that there's something inherently self-contradictory about it, and then nobody else seems to be seeing it. I'm the only one who sees it, and I just have to join a community of people who are like me, who will spot contradictions and be willing to face up and own up to contradictions when they see one.
I think you just gave us our idea for our next series.
Yeah.
Just as we wrap up, what are, if you could only give 2 pieces of advice or 2 key takeaways that you want our viewers to take away from this series, what it would be? Just 2.
Well, one, I would say that be confident that the religion of Islam has been studied for 1400 years in great detail, and Muslim scholars have exercised their intellect, they have done their studies, they have come up with answers for things which people might be having doubts about. And it's necessary for us to go back to that classical scholarship and to discover the answers which are there. Second, the Muslim scholarship of the present time need to understand that there are new reasons for doubt that were not answered by the classical scholarship. And the present day scholarship needs to come forward and deal with these current problems. People are asking questions that were not asked before. Modern technology has given us ways of thinking and possibilities which were not imagined in previous generations. So with those possibilities come new reasons for doubt. So we need to understand these new possibilities, we need to understand where the doubts arise from, and be ready to answer those doubts, especially for our youth.
And my final question to you is, what advice do you have for a viewer who watched our series, and is still struggling with their crisis of faith, because obviously it won't be addressed by watching one video? What advice do you have in terms of any resources or supports that they can go to?
There's a book, Losing My Religion, A Call for Help by Jeffrey Lang. You can see it's a sizable book. And this is a collection of discourses that he's had with people who have expressed doubts about various aspects of Islamic faith. And he has given extensive answers to those questions. By the way, he has an extensive answer in here regarding the question of predestination as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Hey YouTube, we hope you benefited from this video. If you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, check out some of our other videos. And don't forget to subscribe so you can get new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.